I wanted to introduce people to a way of approaching drawing and making art and expressing themselves that didn't trigger lots of feelings of inadequacy and fear and nervousness and inhibition, and didn't make people worry about their artistic skills or how much training they had. And my own discoveries over the years have been that when people draw from their bodies, when they enjoy moving and they relax and they play with crayons in their hands, then somehow that breaks through that. It becomes more like being a toddler, having just found some crayons, and for the first time exploring what shapes can I make if I swing my arms, or I stretch, or I wriggle, or I shake. And over the years, doing this with many people who weren't artists, and observing what happened to them, I just discovered that this was a very good way in, and that it had some other benefits. Well, it invites people to kind of drop into their bodies, relax into their bodies in a very simple, basic way that feels pleasant, nourishing. Can sometimes feel uncomfortable, but in an interesting way, so that people get interested to explore this further. When we're moving around and we're doing jobs and activities, a lot of the time we are on automatic pilot. Quite a lot of the time, if we're very busy or we're hurrying, and when we're meeting external demands, we're not breathing fully. A bit like me now, I'm a little bit nervous, so I'm aware I'm not breathing fully and not really sort of sunk deeply inside my body sometimes when I'm speaking. And this drawing invites people to just sink into their bodies and feel very comfortable, and to draw from there. And then it can also be a bit of a training or an introduction to a kind of mindfulness, a kind of authentic movement, where your attention goes looking for subtle signals, little subtle impulses to move, to express something, to make a shape, make a gesture, and these things begin to appear on the paper, and people get the feedback, oh, now I'm expressing something that's coming from inside me, from my experience, from my lived experience in my body, my felt life. And this kind of loop, feedback loop, becomes more interesting, it becomes settling and exciting, and it's a deep process of self-observation. So from this, quite lively drawings can come, quite exciting lines and dynamics, and the beginnings of paintings. People begin to see images in what they've drawn. Very often when people come for therapy, they have a problem. They feel something is really not going right in themselves or their lives. What's interesting is very often what's causing a lot of this distress is the fact that they're on the run. They're frightened to look too closely or too honestly at what they're really feeling and what's happening. And on some level they're defending against it, or they're running away. And in the process of doing that, they're not breathing fully, they're not seeing fully, they're not hearing fully. They're moving differently, with maybe constriction or whatever. So they're shutting down. And in some sense, they've left their bodies. They might even describe being spaced out, dizzy, very tired, eating and drinking too much or too little, not sleeping or sleeping too much. So there are a lot of physical associated symptoms with mental and emotional and spiritual distress. So one of the ways in which I found gestural drawing very useful, and encouraging people to go into feeling their bodies and sensing what authentic gestures and movement impulses are bubbling from there. One of the ways I found this helpful in therapy is that it tempts people back gently into their bodies to really feel maybe just their skin to start with. Maybe their breathing. I very often start with just following the rhythm and the experience of breathing and noticing how much movement there is in the body just when you breathe. So if you sit in a chair and you breathe fully, actually your ankles move slightly. Sometimes even people can feel it in their toes. And for many people, in many situations, this is an amusing and fascinating revelation. It often brings laughter and surprise. So right from the very beginning, there are these feedback loops where people get a positive reward for being a little bit more aware and for being a little bit more present in their bodies. Having said that, it can work in completely the opposite way. So if someone is suffering from very severe post-traumatic dissociation, I certainly don't ever ask them to sit in the middle of a large piece of paper and to do this, because the overwhelm of suppressed and repressed material can cause blackout, it can cause panic and loss of physical control to the point of it being dangerous. So there's a very clear awareness the therapist has to have of when this is appropriate and when it's not appropriate. So going back to when it is helpful and appropriate, sometimes the problems people come to therapy for, especially living in a community such as this, where people are here for personal development and spiritual growth and awareness, is people feel too small. They feel they're living in a body and habits and a life that is too small for them. They've constricted themselves in some way. They've made themselves smaller. And a lot of people are longing to break out, get a bigger life, and experience more of themselves. They may be very competent and successful in some areas of their life, and in some areas they feel small and like a child still, undeveloped. So the way this has been helpful is, first of all, to give people a very big space to express themselves on, and to invite them to step into it like a territory, like a piece of land that they own and they have dominion over, and they can govern in a way. And then to invite them to breathe and just to begin to make spontaneous marks. And this has helped a number of people actually physically feel their full size and potential. Begin to feel this and begin to express this in other areas of their life, like their voice, how they are at work, the choices they make in their leisure time, how much responsibility they can take on all sorts of things like this. When people come into therapy, we work with everything. So if somebody feels very timid and uncertain of their ability to express themselves artistically, we can work with them. Nervousness. We can trace it back to early experiences. We can look at how it manifests in the present, how they're relating to me, the therapist. So we can deconstruct it and use art to do that. And a lot of learning, a very rich, helpful learning can come from this. Sometimes people are very resistant to working in that way, which I would call using the transference. It uses the relationship between the therapist and the person in the here and now. And sometimes people, they just want to quickly bypass some of their inhibitions about art and get down to talking about what they think is their real problem. So actually inviting people to do some breathing and some movement and to start to move just from these subtle impulses and to explore their bodies and how they're feeling inside, and to move on the paper as if from authentic movement. This can actually be a kind of fast track sometimes to get people past their feeling of I can't draw. Because a lot of people think if I can't draw, how can I have art therapy? How can I benefit from art therapy? So they discover through these feedback loops that I've described, they discover that as soon as they start to do this, they get the feedback that, for example, if I stretch out and move my arms in an arc, I get a perfect apple shape, a bit like the globe, squashed, a circle squashed at both ends. And if I stretch a leg, I get a lovely straight line. So a lot of the things people are insecure about, will I be able to draw beautiful shapes? Will I be able to do a strong line? these get sorted out very quickly. They discover this very quickly. Yes, I can. They get the feedback. I can do this. I can draw. It's a very useful technique as well in training therapists and in working as a therapist for releasing lots of accumulated tension or stress or thoughts in the body. Just going back into the body, back to the rhythm of the breath, and letting this flow as if it flows out through the hands onto the paper. So it is very like dance. It's dance with a different focus. It's not a visual performance, and it's not choreographed. It's other than being an improvisation in the moment. But it's a tracking. I think of it as a tracking process where you're tracking with a tiny spark of your attention. You're tracking the passage of breath and the rhythms of breath and blood and lymph and all the rhythms that there are in the body. And all these rhythms are informing then what comes out and is expressed through the hands and the limbs and the torso and the feet. I've never used this technique with dancers working towards a performance. I've used it with visual artists who want to free themselves up from some creative block in the middle of a commission, say, when people have got stuck. I have used it in workshops with people who are dancers, who feel very identified with movement as their expressive modality and are very wary of drawing and painting and visual art. So actually for them it's a way into visual art from something they feel more at home with. And also what happens is because they're dancing, if you like, in a different way, the focus isn't on presenting forms and shapes projected outwards to an audience, but very much keeping all the attention inside and watching what flows out. Some dancers have reported that this is very, very interesting to them and quite liberating, and also helps them really make a connection between their dance and more visual forms of expression. So I've had quite a lot of feedback from dance artists, various kinds of dance artists about this. As an art therapist, I've always had the conviction that somehow our organism is trying to show us itself by what pours out through our hands. Somehow our expression is informed by everything, every minute process going on in the body. So this is more an article of faith and belief for me. I've been interested to kind of test it. I have this question, where does the drawing come from? Where do these forms of expression really come from? Can we get a sense, an actual experience of the body informing the drawing? So it's been rather like an exploration for me, a very deep personal exploration for me of going further back and back and back from the paper and the marks on the paper to see how far I can go, finding very subtle impulses is the only word I have, that feel like the beginning of some form wanting to emerge and manifest itself, the beginnings of a drawing. And this very early beginning really interests me, and how much we can sense of what is informing that. The feedback I've had from doing this process and teaching this process and with many, many people is that actually as we engage in this going back, looking with very soft but very awake attention, is somehow our body does feel as if it's informing the drawing, and we learn more about ourselves. We somehow go in deeper, inhabit more fully, and discover more. So then the art actually becomes a very full expression of who we are. So I think this is very beneficial. I don't know yet whether, I have never worked long term with an artist, a visual artist, to find out whether working in this way would enhance their art. What I have heard from people is artists saying, this is very like what I always do when I paint, but I never realised, or I never have described it. It's just a way I kind of found. So I think there are many artists out there working this way, and we simply haven't heard about it. But I think a lot of non-artists would quite like to hear about this and have a go. I think it's encouraging, profoundly encouraging. For part of this film, we are here in the Universal Hall, which is the Findhorn Foundation Community's beautiful art centre, performance space, and a place where we have had many very exciting art courses, where we have done big gestural drawings, big paintings, where people have followed the thread of their imagination. It's a beautiful big auditorium with wonderful acoustics, so people have been able to burst into song in the middle of their paintings and had a good experience of that. So it's a very rich and richly inhabited place, and a very blessed space to do any kind of communication about the arts in. And I feel very privileged to be here as a member of the community and able to use this space. And I hope you enjoy this film.